Raise your fists together. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Red and yellow, brown, black, and white. We're all precious in God's sight. Everybody is somebody. Stop the violence. Save the children. Stop bullying. Save the children.
Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Good morning, I'm Candace McCollum, and welcome to the Saturday Morning Forum. We have a great program in store for you. We are talking about disparities in civil service jobs nationwide. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back.
We're excited to get more people engaged and involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. Now, if you're interested in public policy and you want to help change the policies that impact those who are incarcerated, you can do so. If you're interested in impacting public policies that benefit education and businesses with social economic solutions, you can do that as well. You can become a policymaker by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now. Now, if you believe in the scholarships that we've given to thousands of students each year, you can help us out. We've awarded more than $10 million in scholarships year to date. Now, you can help young people achieve a higher education by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now for the annual fee of only $35. And if you're a student or a senior, it's only $15. You can help us make a difference in the lives of millions. Now, if you watch us every week, or if you listen to us on the radio, or if you're viewing on social media, we need you to become a member. And how do you become a member? It's simple. Visit us at rainbowpush.org and press join. Maybe you'd like to support the work of Push. If so, it's really simple. You can do so by texting the word PUSH, that's P-U-S-H, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give any amount that you feel comfortable giving, or you can call us at 773-256-2775 or go to rainbowpush.org and push donate. So whenever you want to support, you can do it from anywhere. So keep pushing, because we're going to keep pushing for you and keep hope alive.
Good morning. I would like to start our conversation by examining the lack of diversity in municipal jobs across the U.S. Now, with me right now, I do have Attorney Todd Yeary. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, Attorney Yeary, can you provide an overview of the national landscape regarding diversity in the fire departments, police, and water and reclamation services?
You hit four key places. Let's kind of put it in historical context. If we go back a bit, as we have just recently celebrated 70 years since the seminal decision in Brown versus Board of Education, much like we've seen in the recent decisions from the UNC and Harvard cases, Brown actually tore down a lot of barriers in terms of public accommodations and in many ways public employment. What we saw after the advent of Brown is the expansion of the Black middle class through positions within local governments and municipalities, educators, public sector employees that actually provided opportunities to create neighborhood stability, but also economic longevity. And so when we look at the history of employment and the building out of a Black middle class, much of it came by way of access to public sector jobs, because very often what you had was a commitment of folks to community, to trying to make government work, recognizing that those were the pathways that many of them had followed to get to where they are. And over time, what we've seen is that stability has either eroded by attrition, but also by what we've seen recently in terms of the outright assault on the cases that promoted affirmative action as a policy. So you've got Brown in 54. The first time affirmative action is mentioned by President Kennedy is in 1962, 1963 in terms of federal government employment. And now what we've seen is actually the pushback on not only those advances, which over time have been relatively modest, But now even those modest gains are under attack in terms of not only the litigation, but the legislation that we see coming through many of the states across the country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering. Now, for our next question, can you highlight any landmark legal cases or significant policy changes that are positively impacted diversity in each field?
Well, generally, what we've seen is just the fight in the courts for access, where historically it was actually a legitimate basis to exclude someone from employment, say, based on race. As we started seeing the racial fight play out, not just in terms of access to employment, but really access to opportunities, higher education, before Brown versus Board, and then what we've seen in terms of the landmark discrimination cases over time. A lot of this has really been not just a particular case or two generally, but a number of cases that have had to come by way of just persistence in making sure that the access to opportunity was not removed or retracted. And what we've actually seen is a need for more litigation because, oddly enough, it is actually the litigation path that has created new opportunities for federal judges in the Supreme Court to actually say that affirmative action or race based considerations for access, whether it's higher education, and now we're beginning to see it in terms of jobs, those have been invalidated. One way that we've actually seen it push back is in with Black farmers, where they actually had more punitive loan terms from the federal government just to be able to sustain their farming operations. And when, with the recent legislation that came out to forgive some of that debt, you actually have now seen pushback because that opportunity was not extended even to white farmers who didn't have the same level of adversity to overcome. And so what we've really had to do is think creatively over and against the changing landscape of a judiciary that is largely ill-informed and in many instances uninformed about the history of how we've actually gotten here and how we moved from Dred Scott to Plessy to a post Brown versus Board of Education. And then last week, even in the reasserting of the congressional map in South Carolina, one of the justices, Justice Thomas, actually went back to the Brown decision and said that the Supreme Court overreached in reaching its conclusions and that that decision needed to be reviewed. When you have that kind of open conversation, open musing about how the court needs to go back and undo the necessary gains that we've enjoyed over time and still haven't gotten our fair share, then it's not only that we need to be alert, we really need to be ready because we are under an outright assault on the interests, whether it's legally or whether it's legislatively, in terms of the access to opportunity that we, for a while, actually took for granted.
So, what would you say is the quickest call to action that one could take to start making a difference?
Well, the quickest call to action is to do your part, right? And while we often run into some reluctance and some hesitance about voting in elections, quite honestly, you got to be registered and you got to vote. Why? Because the ballot is not about personalities, it's about policy. And when we look at the policies, very often we get caught up on who's running as opposed to what's on the agenda, what comes before who in the dictionary and in politics. And so when we consider how this next election is going to play out, when the ballots come out in November, we're not just electing the president, we're not just electing the Congress. In many localities around the country, there will be local and state elections. There may be local initiatives that advocate for the spending of public dollars. But it also comes down to who do the elected officials pay attention to when it's time to start dealing with the actual policies that will be developed. One of the first things we find elected officials doing is they will often go back and look at the voter rolls to see who voted, where they voted, so that they then are aware uh, as to which communities, which interests they're going to actually pay attention to. If we do not show up and be present, we will not be acknowledged or remembered after the election is over. And that is just the name of the game. It's not enough to play Monopoly fighting over which piece you're going to have. You actually have to play the game and play it to win. And it's not enough to hold on hoping you'll pass go and collect $200. We have to literally be engaged in ongoing systemic community revitalization, starting with political participation, but then pushing for the policy outcomes that will lead to the transformation that our communities actually need.
Absolutely. So now I know you touched on this at the beginning, but can you please go back to how did Reverend Jesse Jackson's affirmative action efforts in the 1980s influence the landscape and where we're going forward here from 1980 till now? It's changed. The goalpost has changed, but we're still fighting a hard battle.
Well, we're fighting a hard battle. What Reverend did in his first run 40 years ago, the first thing he did was he registered new players, right? He signed up a whole new core of a team to be part of the movement that he was building. And what that actually created was angst within the status quo. The reality is that you've got to position yourself to shake up business as usual so that you can begin to lead to the change. What that change, while we know it changed the rules of how the Democratic Party dealt with its internal workings, what it really did is it changed the level of expectation to make sure that there was economic, political, and social accountability for the outcomes that had been racially disparate for far too long. And so when we consider what Reverend's work has been, his body of work and his life's commitment, is it's been more than changing the optics of the thing. It has been really about changing the substantive reality for the masses to be able to have that opportunity. And it has started with a grassroots, community-based driven, often faith-based focus opportunity to change the economic reality of people upon whose backs the economy has been built, but they haven't necessarily benefited from the economic growth, the outcome, and the wealth that has been generated by their efforts. So in many ways, this is an opportunity to see, did we learn anything from Reverend 40 years ago? Or have we just stuck our head in the sand and pretended that we've checked that box and now it's time to move on? I think it is time for us to go back and relearn and put together and put to use the tools that Reverend has shown us, starting with political organizing, full political participation, changing the dynamic realities of who represents our interests, and starting with City Hall before we jump to the big shiny thing at the White House.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me this morning. And as you've laid it out, it's an effort that's going to take community, it's going to take federally and locally as well. So Attorney Todd Yeary, thank you again. We appreciate you. I would like to have you back later on in the program if that's okay with you.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This is a wonderful program, and we hope that you're enjoying it. I ask that you go to rainbowpush.org and become a member and donate to the best of your ability. You know, this program costs, but could you imagine the cost without it? So we're asking for you to become a partner, to become a member of the Rainbow Push Coalition today and donate to the best of your ability. We're looking forward to providing you with more critical content for a time such as this. Go to rainbowpush.org or just scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen. And we'll see you next time at the Rainbow Push Coalition.
Good morning. Now I'd like to welcome Senator Robert Peters. How are you doing this morning, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So locally speaking, I would like to know, Senator Peters, can you outline the current initiatives and legislation in Illinois aimed at promoting equity within the fire and safety sectors?
Yeah, I mean, what we've done is expanded access to testing. We have legislators such as myself and many of us in the Black Caucus who've been fighting to make sure there's more equity and inclusion and basically protect DEI when it comes to fire and particularly other public safety roles. We're talking about kind of turning the Titanic when it comes to where we're at in terms of this crisis. And you put on top of the fact that DEI as a whole, or equity as a whole, has been getting attacked both at the national, state, and local level. It's a huge challenge. But for all of us in Illinois, we're trying to sort of be that sort of beacon, that dot of hope compared to every state around us. So to be very honest with you, we're working hard. There are many challenges to get this done, but there's been quite an amazing organizing effort to make sure that we see changes happen. And then overall, not just in fire and public safety, but DEI as overall has been facing a very, very brutal right-wing attack over the last couple years.
Absolutely. And the attack on DEI, how would this affect not just the fire department? Of course, obviously, that's what we're here for today, but other jobs as well within, the water department recently had their settlement, police officers, and anybody else in municipal.
It's funny you say that, not just the water department, but the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, which handles our rainwater, our sewage water. Basically, it's an underground network that makes the city run, has been having an intense battle when it comes to equity and inclusion, particularly for jobs in MWRD. So what you're seeing is in these trade positions, particularly public funded, so fire, MWRD, the water department, police, just in public safety broadly, you're seeing a real struggle and fight to sort of make sure that Black folks have access to the jobs and have access to the promotions necessary so that we can have fairness throughout the rest of the city and throughout the rest of the state. And so this has been a challenge not only locally, but a challenge nationally. And I will just say, this has been something. I think I do a lot of work in violence prevention, and I sort of see this as where we can get a head start on some of these fights, where we can bring the equity, particularly to Black working class communities, through violence prevention programs. And what we can do is legitimize those jobs and make them professional. So it's not just someone making $15 an hour or $18 an hour, but they're on the path to one day getting like a pension or getting full benefits and stability. And so to me, trying to get a jump start on that, because where we're at currently with fire, where we're at with many of the engineering jobs in MWRD, and where we're at in terms of obviously police has been particularly painful and difficult.
Can you speak how the state of Illinois is currently or in the past has addressed historical disparities?
Yeah, I mean, we've moved legislation. I think the biggest standout was really, I don't want to give the state too much credit, it's really consent decree in the fire department, because for decades, it was almost impossible to be able to get a Black person in the fire department. And then the court really kind of had to step in and do a consent decree. And that sort of opened the door to where we're at now, where we're seeing numbers dwindle. We're not seeing the promotions that we need to see. And so as a state, we're trying to open up access to testing. We're trying to push the department in terms of hiring, trying to find people holding, making sure that there's training and classes that are out there. But there's still, as much as we're pushing as a state recently, and as much as the consent decree had pushed the city, I think we're still, as you can see, and from the organizing that's happening, this is still a fight that's going to keep going. I mean, I will point out there was an incident really close to my district. So Southside, Bronzeville, North Kenwood-ish area, where around 2020 and just after the sort of George Floyd protests, a banner was put up that said Black Lives Matter. And it would have been, I think it would have been Cottage Grove, and I'm not 35th, so it would have been pretty 40, just north of 47th Street, at the fire, and right outside this fire department. And somebody who worked in the fire department actually took down the Black Lives Matter sign, and I think that just goes to show the challenge that we face in terms of bringing that sort of DEI into our public safety sector.
Absolutely. Now, looking forward, can you talk about what are the key indicators that we should watch for that would measure progress?
I mean, I think just the number of Black folks in the fire department, the number of Black folks who currently are in the fire department getting promotions in the fire department. I think it's important to see where they're putting folks. I think we want people both in our community, but we also want to say that if you're a Black firefighter, that you can be on the north side of town, for example. I think those are sort of the key things that you really want to look at, is the sheer number. And what I will say is, because of the attacks that we've seen on DEI, and the blowback that's happened, that's not immune to what's happening in our city. So I think it's also important to see, and I think this is important for the city to do, is what's the grievance process, and what does the grievance process look like for a Black firefighter who might be experiencing discrimination, and how are they supposed to approach that? And what is that, do they have to stay quiet in order to survive? My guess is, for a lot of people in that space, that's where you go, right? You feel like you have to protect yourself. You have to protect this job. But I think that really matters, because if you don't feel comfortable, you might not stay in that workforce. So to me, I think it's both the sheer number, the promotions that matter, where we're putting folks throughout the city, and making sure that if they have a grievance, that they have some semblance of protection.
Absolutely. And before we go, I think it's also important to understand, of course, we're focusing on Chicago, but this is also happening in other cities as well. Detroit, Milwaukee, but it's a problem that needs to be fixed, not just here, but in other cities as well.
Agreed. I mean, look, the attacks, I can't emphasize this enough. The attacks that came from the Supreme Court on this, and people attacking affirmative action broadly. Florida, the state of Florida has attacked DEI pretty heavily. They've been calling it woke over and over again. We're in a period of immense right-wing blowback on equity, and we need to do whatever we can to fight back and protect it, and to be honest with you, expand it. And so we need to continue to have people in the streets, continue pressing on your elected officials to stand up and speak out, and continue to organize and build power, because that's the only way we're going to be able to fight back against this sort of right-wing attack on civil rights.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me this morning, Senator Robert Peters. Again, we appreciate your time.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Push Excel strives to be a world leader in promoting educational excellence and equity, so that every child is guaranteed an opportunity to receive a quality education. We've awarded more than $10 million in scholarships year to date. And you can help young people achieve a higher education by donating to Push Excel right now. Wherever you are, you can support our students as we keep pushing for you.
Welcome back. Joining me right now, I do have Jim Wimbush. How are you this morning?
I'm very, very good.
Now, can you talk about where you are? I'm loving the shirt. I'm loving the background, the setting. You're on vacation?
I'm at my home away from home on a 38-foot catamaran sailboat on the coast of Florida at St. Augustine.
All right, absolutely. So I want to jump right into it, because you are the founder of the African American Firefighter and Paramedic League, founded in 1967. And so it is an honor to just have you here, give the context to everything that is going on currently. Can you please paint the picture for us when it comes to the strike in 1980?
The strike was Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 1980 at 5 o'clock in the morning. And Local 2 walked out because they wanted a contract. And there was only 4 fire companies in the entire city, of which one of them was a black company at 40th and Dearborn. An all-black engine company at 40th and Dearborn was the only company on the south side. At this point, we was only 300 blacks on the fire department. But Jane Byrne called us in to her office on the 5th floor and said, I guess she thought we was a Spartan 300 or something. Said, if y'all go back to work, I'll fire all the white boys on strike, and you'll be in charge of the job. And so Captain Carl Garn said, well, if you can do that, and can you give us a memo on that, or a private memo or something? She said, absolutely not. So Carl Garn said, well, we absolutely not going to do it. So we then went and met with Reverend Jackson. She then called Reverend Jackson and asked him to negotiate the strike, okay, to which Reverend agreed to and met with, and this is like about day 5 or so of the strike. We had a lot of fires, a lot of fire deaths, and no fire companies, okay? So Reverend the team was Reverend Jackson, Reverend Ed Riddick, Willie Taplin Barrel, and myself. So we were locked in. He was on his shuttle diplomacy thing between the city and the union. By about day 15, Jane Burns said, "The strike's broken. We got enough people back. We can fire everybody else." And Reverend said, "Oh no, I'm going to continue to negotiate for amicable settlement to the firefighters' strike." So he continued on with that. We continued having a bunch of fires. A bunch of black folk got killed. A bunch of black property got burned up. And it was after 23 days, 23 black people lost their lives, and about 35 structures were lost. And we met to close on a strike. The only thing Reverend asked for was an affirmative action plan called Appendix G in the contract, of which the author was Ed Riddick, a black labor lawyer, and myself. And it was to give black folk 30% of the jobs, because we were 30% of the population of the city of Chicago, which is an equitable, fair thing to do. In fact, all of the white boys that have lost their job, if Jane Byrne had her way, she'd have fired half the fire department, okay? So they all agreed to it, everything else. But in the past 42 years, okay, Local 2 has never supported any affirmative action, anything on Appendix G, fought it hard not to do it. And we've had 4 black mayors, including the one we got today, and none of them acted on it, okay? The loss to the black community economically is about $6 billion, which would have got a lot of folks, kids to college, dental work, marriages, families, all of that.
What do you think, in your opinion, why have the previous black mayors, why have they not done what you think they need to do? Or do you think that solely is their responsibility? I do know a lot of people, when I hear and I'm talking to people, the mayors, that's what they keep on saying. This is, the mayor's responsibility. Why do you think the mayors are not holding up their end, if that's a fair assessment?
Lack of intestinal fortitude, A. B, they want to be middle of the road. They take us for granted and expect to earn the respect of the good white folks and the other folk in the city of Chicago. But this is an agreement, 42 years old, between the city of Chicago and the Chicago Fire Department, and every other part of the contract has been implemented except this part of the contract.
So what would you say, you and Reverend Jesse Jackson, obviously, again, we thank you. You have started the movement. What would you say to those who are currently from where you are in the class, the Lewis class? What would you say for them to keep on going and marching forward? What would be your advice to them?
Our community has nothing, absolutely nothing, okay? It's streets, sand, personnel, fire department, and police department, okay? Those are the four major levels of service into the city of Chicago and into the black community. And, we're living in a wasteland. And when we've been here, we've been in this situation, and that's exactly where we are. But nobody seems to have the intestinal fortitude, and we're losing our leaders either through time moved on.
And one last question before we go. What steps can municipal governments take to create more inclusive hiring and promotional processes?
We've got Appendix G that's 42 years old.
Right.
Implement Appendix G. That's it. It's agreed to by both parties on every renewal of the contract. Just implement the contract. Straight up. You ain't got to march, you ain't got to do nothing, just implement the contract. Mayor Johnson, thank you so very, very much.
Well, well, thank you. There you have it. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Jim Winbush. You have been a leader in this fight, so we thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to our International Saturday morning broadcast. We need your support. Here are ways to give to Rainbow Push Coalition. Text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444 to support the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Rainbow Push Coalition.
Welcome back, Todd Yeary. So right now I do want to ask some questions specifically to the Chicago Fire Department, if that is okay with you. So that first question would be, do you believe that the Chicago Fire Department has made a good faith effort in promoting African Americans and Hispanics to the fire department?
Well, let me give you the short answer, and that's no. So good faith has to be more than intentions. It has to be driven by outcomes. Those outcomes have to be supported by data. When we look at the data points, when we look at the trajectory of not only the pipeline, the line firefighters, but what promotions have looked like over the last several years since the Lewis class first went to court, we have to remember that it's not enough to have symbolic wins in court. We actually have to have policy wins in terms of the implementation. And in many ways, what we've seen with the Chicago firefighter is we got language, we didn't get performance. So we got nice words in Appendix G, we've got a nice framework, but what we've missed was the actual implementation. What was going to be the follow-up? What was going to be the follow-through to make sure that what the intentions were at the time the Lewis decision came down? And let's remember that the Lewis class case went all the way up to the Supremes, came back on a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court with a decision that was written by Scalia. So let's be real clear. This was not some fanciful outcome. When you can get that kind of a solid rationale behind the legal reasoning about why that Lewis class was designated the way that it was, then you have to make sure you don't have any excuses now for not following through on the implementation. And that's why I say there's a no. You don't get a grade of good faith when you failed on the most basic requirements of follow-up and follow-through, making sure there's accountability in terms of the committee structure, making sure you're tracking the numbers in real time to make sure that when you do your performance comparisons year over year, you are actually able to track. And we see it now in terms of the disparities just based on the representation of members of the fire force and where they live in the city of Chicago. So there are actual neighborhoods that have been left behind in this half generation since this decision has come down. That is not acceptable. And for that, you don't get an A for effort, you get an A for outcomes.
Absolutely. So can we talk about, you just mentioned the Appendix G. Was Appendix G made illegal because of the resolution of the decree?
Well, I'm not sure where this question of illegality or legality comes in. Appendix G is actually part of a contract. The contract is an agreement of terms between the parties to, in this instance, it's the city and the local firefighter union, who's the designated bargaining unit agent. So when we look at that whole process, the real question is, how do the parties to the contract follow through on their obligations to make sure that there's enforcement and implementation? On one hand, the city wants to pat itself on the back because they say, look, some of the numbers are better. And while some numbers aren't quite as good as we want them to be, they're better than they once were. That's not even the relative issue. The relative issue from my perspective and others is, does the fire service in the city of Chicago reflect the representation and the diversity of the city of Chicago? Do we see an overconcentration of representatives to the fire service from some neighborhoods to the exclusion and omission from other neighborhoods? So when we look at whether or not Appendix G in its language was rendered of no effect, that really has little to do with what has happened in terms of litigation recently. It's that it has never been given the full force of the attention of the parties. And I don't believe that in many instances the union has called the city out as it should have and could have around an unfair labor practice charge, because they weren't following through on the committee obligations. They weren't giving the reports. And when we've asked for the data from the reports that should have been published, the first thing we get is a notice that says we don't have that information you're requesting. That is actually unacceptable, and it represents in many instances not only a breach of the terms of the contract, but it really undercuts this sense that there was ever any real commitment to address the faults that were identified in the Lewis litigation and others, and that there's much more work that has to be done. And of course, this takes us back to the first segment. This is why the communities have to be organized, because not having a diverse fire service is actually leading to the harms that are occurring in many of the communities in the city of Chicago.
Now, before we go, you're talking about not having enough diversity. In Chicago, what is there a personnel or anything that you feel like this falls on, or a group that we need to talk to, a certain individual? Who do you think can actually get this rectified?
Well, let me give you two answers. One is Lottie Dottie and everybody. So that's whomever and whenever, right? Some of that is the fire commissioner, but really, in particular, it's the mayor. Whoever sits in the mayor's seat, that's not a personality, that's an office. There has to be follow-up with the mayor. There has to be follow-up with the representatives to the council, because at the end of the day, you got to keep the pressure and the discomfort in all places, not just some places. The truth of the matter is that the two answers, everybody's got to be engaged, Lottie Dottie and everybody, but also those who are in particular positions of trust and authority. The union has a piece to play. The fire commissioner has a piece to play. But the mayor ultimately is the one that has the most important lever to be able to say it's an important policy commitment from the mayor's point of view that the fire service reflects the diversity of a world city like the city of Chicago. It is not proper in 2024 to have the city that is named after a Black man not have enough people who look like him as part of the fire service of one of the greatest cities in the world.
All right, well, there you have it again. Thank you for joining me, Attorney Todd Yeary.
They are known as the Lewis Class, a group of 86 African-American men and women who in 2012 graduated from the Chicago Fire Department's Academy. It was a dream that only became possible after a federal judge ruled that the way the 1995 test they sat for was graded was discriminatory. At the time, their seniority was back timed to 1999 in every category except one: promotions.
It's weird, but I feel like an opportunity was snatched from me. I do believe I could end my career as a battalion chief. I know I test well enough. I know I have the acumen.
Daryl Payne, Rodney Shelton, and Michael Tackey were all part of that graduating class. Today, they, along with their attorneys, spoke out on behalf of a legal filing made in November that, if granted, would change that discrepancy.
To automatically carve out 30% of an exam to go to seniority, and then you don't give them a proper seniority, there's nothing but clear harm there.
Tackey was 51 years old by the time he joined the fire department. He retired early, in large measure after realizing there was nowhere to go.
It kind of felt like you at a marathon, but everybody's halfway down the marathon, and you're there with them with everything except promotions, and you got to start the race from zero.
City officials acknowledge there was discrimination present back when the Lewis class first tested. Then Mayor Rahm Emanuel even made reference to it at their graduation. But it is unclear why, for pay purposes, they were given one seniority date, but for promotions, another one.
Good morning and welcome back to the Saturday Morning Forum. Joining me right now, I have attorney Jaquita Hall Jackson, and I also have Patrick McCollum, who is a firefighter and engineer for the Chicago Fire Department. But I would like to start with you, attorney Jackson. How are you?
Good morning, y'all. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
So I do want to ask a question that I did ask earlier of Attorney Todd Yeary. Can you please provide an overview of the national landscapes regarding diversity in the fire department, police department, and the water reclamation?
Nationally, I think it's going to be an issue for a while, and it has been for years, and I don't see an immediate change right now due to the fact that we as a whole, every time, even you can listen to the responses that you had over and over again, everyone is targeting the CEO. Everyone is targeting the mayors, the men and the women at the top. However, the issue really relies on the people that hold these positions for 15 plus years. And that's usually in your human resources department, your labor relations department, and those chief of staffs that maybe switch over with the administration. You have to understand those who are in power at the top, CEOs, mayors, those usually come with a short-term commitment. If you're not reelected, that you only get 4 years, possibly 8 on the good side. And with what can you do to 4 to 8 years versus someone who sits in a seat 15 to 30 years collecting a pension? Those are the ones who are actually doing the recruiting, the hiring, and setting the job descriptions up and making that decision whether or not to hire or fire. And as a result, that is who we want to target. And until we get that in our heads and until we target those individuals and make them uncomfortable, then we will never see a change.
So I want to ask, who do you think is responsible for this issue? Is it the mayor? Again, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation with the previous guest, when you hear people talking in the streets, that's the first person that they go to when, who can fix it? And they always call out the mayors. Do you think that is the proper person to call out, or what other personnel do you think are responsible?
In my professional opinion, and I have been practicing in labor and employment for over 7 years at this point, and what I'm finding consistently is that we have to boil down to the decision makers, and ultimately that is not the mayors, that is not the CEO or anyone with some kind of authority that we know and recognize as a household name. You can actually probably ask each one of these individuals that you might see today, or any firefighter, have they ever met a mayor? Did the mayor of any city, have they ever shook their hands, spoke with them? Do they know them on a personal level? And the answer will more likely be no, because the decision maker is usually not the mayor or the person at top. It's usually someone in labor relations, a recruiter, human resources department, or someone like that. And so those are the individuals that we want to target, and we want to go in and make sure we're looking at the hiring, recruiting, all the responsibilities of that department. We want to look at their past practices and their history, pull that for 20, 30 years, and see what practices are you seeing. And you will notice more than likely that the decision maker is the same person who sat in those seats that's sitting there collecting the pension on the city's dime, but they're the one also causing the cities to go bankrupt with getting multiple lawsuits. So it's not the mayors, it's not the CEO of these large corporations that gets the front line headline every time a lawsuit is filed. Start putting in those clerks, those recruiters, labor relations head of departments, those individuals you want to put on the front of the newspapers. And that's who you want to show on the media several times a day. And I bet we'll see things change at that point.
Now, locally, I would like to talk about Chicago. Let's talk about the Lewis case victory. Black firefighters represented only 12% of the force, despite the city's population being over 30% Black. How has this underrepresentation impacted the Black community in Chicago, respectively?
In Chicago, respectively, it's ironic. We can all sit here and agree, if we want to go to a nice restaurant or impress a friend that's coming from out of town, we're taking them downtown Chicago. We take them to the north side of Chicago. We are not taking them in our own neighborhoods. Why? Because our own neighborhoods are run down. And the main point is that outside of these burning buildings that we heard Mr. Winbush talk about, and several other people just talking about the conditions of the Black community, you also have to realize that the individuals, that taxpayers that sits in these communities are more than likely someone who has college debt, because we had a sitcom and several sitcoms in the 80s that pushed so many of us to education, and now we're in debt, along with making six figures, if we can see it, less than six figures in most situations. And for those who do not even consider college, the idea that they don't have the means and resources to maintain a household and their family. So you got 6 or 7 people living in the household, and the kids growing up in these horrible conditions. Why? Because we don't have access to the civil service jobs. And so it's a huge impact. It not only impacts individual families and their income, you're talking about neighborhoods that we are scared to go in, and we must go in during the daytime where it's light outside because we're scared of being subjected to robbery. Why are people robbing and having high crime rates in these neighborhoods? Because they don't have access that the people on the north side and downtown have due to the fact that their parents did not get access when they decided to apply for a civil service job. They didn't get the opportunity. They were sitting here, have to go to lawsuits, pay for litigation to fight discriminatory practices on applications. And when they finally did get into jobs, they're not getting promoted and getting the fair pay that their colleagues are getting. That's what the impact is. And we'll continue to see it again until we remove the wrongdoers out of those seats.
Thank you for that. So now I want to talk to Patrick McCollum, who is a Chicago firefighter, engineer, and paramedic. You are part of the Lewis class. For those who are not familiar, can you please expand on that?
The Lewis class is a group of 111 firefighters who came on pursuant to a 1998 lawsuit. That's when the lawsuit was begun. But it stemmed from the fact that 26,000 people sat for an exam in the United Center in the summer of '95. It was approximately 9,500 African Americans who took the test over a 2-day period. Roughly 6,800 blacks passed the exam. And unfortunately, that 6,800 who passed the exam was whittled down to 204 blacks pursuant to a decision made by a person in personnel to implement a cutoff score of 89 and above. So to piggyback on what Attorney Hall Jackson said, this problem stemmed directly from a decision made by a person in personnel who ran personnel. And the odd point about that is that that person was told by the expert who wrote that exam that that was not an appropriate cutoff to use to eliminate roughly, 6,500 African Americans out of the process. So these are type of decisions, or that's caused, or that decision by a personnel person in '95 has led to situations that we're dealing with 29 years later. So that is the background of my class, or at least what precipitated the lawsuit that was started by Arthur Lewis Jr. So Arthur Lewis Jr., along with several other plaintiffs, went to EOC, and that metastasized into a full-blown legal case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So it started at the District Court, Appellate Court, then went to the Supreme Court, where we won, or where the Lewis case was won, a 9-0 decision, and it was subsequently remanded back down to the federal court, and we came on the job March 16th, 2012. 27 years after we took the exam in '95.
Okay, and can you talk about the immediate impacts of that once the inclusion of, the 111 came to be in the Chicago Fire Department?
The immediate impact was obviously the 111 of us who came on the job, 109 men and 2 women. Now, out of that, we had to, an additional 46 women had to file an additional suit called the Godfrey suit to deal with the discrimination in regards to sex discrimination. They kept them off the job, or pursuant to the process that I came on with and my other classmates. So but as far as the impact we came on as firefighters, at least the immediate impact to the city was they had to pay $85 million to settle that lawsuit with the Lewis class. But we came on, the immediate impact for us was we came on with roughly 13 and a half years of seniority. And so we came on with, with the pay level commensurate with the award that we were awarded as far as our lawsuit was concerned.
And can I add to that, if you don't mind, Ms. McCollum? The impact that my client is trying to not highlight here is the idea that you had men that usually the city will allow a cutoff at the age of 36 to get on the job, who they were in their 40s and 50s coming into a job that was fit and structured for a 20-year-old to 30-year-old individual. And so that means the physical restraints and also the mental capacity and everything else that you need to pass this exam and pass the academy was pushed onto these individuals. And as a result, they also had an impact on the idea that they will not, most of them will not see opportunity to get promoted because of their ages. There's a cutoff with the age of 63 for the fire department when they walk you out the door. And so if you're coming in your 50s, the idea of seeing a promotion when the earliest you can see a promotion is 8 to 12 years later of most desired positions for these individuals is ridiculous. And it's a huge impact to this day. And most of them, as they exit, will not have maximized the retirement benefits that they could have versus someone of the age of 21 through 36. So the impact is bigger. But the most beautiful impact was we had 111 Black individuals come in and was sworn. And the worst impact, $82 million taken away from our babies that could have went to education and so many other situations and departments within the city of Chicago had people did their jobs and did it ethically.
Now, this question I would like to ask for you, Mr. McCollum. Have you or your class, has there been any type of backlash that you feel from your class being included into what you guys have been, what's been taken away from you, essentially?
But I think it's based foundation on people not understanding legal concepts, or that, you know, we weren't made whole when we were brought in the job 17 years late, and that people got a 17-year head start on us who sat for the same exam that we sat for. So, you know, it's unfortunate that a lot of this rumbling or pushback or is based on basically just foundational ignorance of what was denied us pursuant to us coming on the job 17 years after we should have came on the job. So it's to be expected, though.
And Attorney Hall, what that kind of the same question for you. What do you have to say to the naysayers or people that just aren't understanding what this case means? And do they even believe that discrimination exists in the Chicago Fire Department and other areas as well?
Ironically, Mr. McCollum outlined the idea that you're looking at social media comments and they heard rumblings around their colleagues in the workplace. And when I do talk to my clients, what I'm hearing is mostly is African Americans who don't understand why they're in court, why they're wasting their time. But what people need to realize that is bigger than the 111 that's going back to court. This is to lay a foundation for all Black and brown people, and just across the board, equity and across the board for everybody. Don't just staff us, give us equal opportunities once we're in there. So it's the inclusion portion. And so they're opening doors for you. You might not see it right now, but their fight is for everyone. And it's not just for Black and brown people, essentially. It's for everybody. You should want your colleagues to go up to you. You came in the academy together. So I have seen it across the board where people, I come in together with my colleagues. The same thing with high school. You want to see these people walk out equal and equipped just like you are and give the opportunities to their grandchildren just like you gave it to yours. So it's bigger than the Lewis class. It's for you all. And so the idea that they got more than they deserve, that's not true. One, they shouldn't have never had to go to court just to get a job based on an application. They was discriminated on the application process. Now that they're in, there is no inclusion because they are far behind. They have not, they just got their first chief in 2023. And so with that, that's not fair when you look at the other classes, and those that they're competing against is those that took tests 12 years after them. And so it's selfish to think that way. And I think that's why I say at the very beginning, why I think it'll be a long time before we change, because we have to, as Black people, stop having this crab in the bucket mentality and realize that we are here for each other, and we're not going to change until we change our mindset and understand and work alongside each other.
And one more question before we leave. I do know a lot of young Black men who have taken the test previously, and they do feel some type of way about not getting in for whatever reasons they feel like they didn't. What would you say for one who has been through this situation and maybe they want to test again, and they don't want to, or they're afraid to, or think they're going to be left out? What would you say to those men and women?
I would say continue to, every time the opportunity presents itself, sign up for the exam. You've got one or two things that can happen. Either you will make it through the process, be selected, or if it turns out that something is incorrect with the process, as it was in the case of the Lewis class, then that way you may be the beneficiary of potential litigation. However, if you don't put yourself in the process, then you eliminate both those opportunities. So when the test comes, make sure you sign up, whether it's CPD, CFD, water reclamation, or streets and sand, put in for all four of those positions.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, one more question for you. How does this case, locally here in Chicago, how is this going to set a precedent for other cases similar across the country?
I believe the Lewis class is going to set a precedent for the world, and definitely within the United States. You're going to see different mayors and personnel companies and departments making significant changes. One, in how they administer exams for these interests of the academy, how the academy is structured and developed, and then most importantly, once these individuals are in place, what kind of promotional opportunities are there going to be given to these employees? Because once we have our victory, we definitely will see that more people are going to try to get themselves together so that they won't go bankrupt.
All right, well, there you have it. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Candace McCollum, and I want to say thank you to our guests who joined us this morning. I have to say thank you to Todd Yeary, Jim Wimbush, Senator Robert Peters, Chiquita Hall Jackson, and Patrick McCollum. And of course, I want to say thank you to you for joining us on our Saturday morning forum at the Rainbow Push Coalition headquarters. And of course, don't forget to join us next week for Reverend Jesse Jackson's Q-versary.
Thank you for tuning in to our International Saturday morning broadcast. We need your support. Here are ways to give to Rainbow Push Coalition. Text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444 to support the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Rainbow Push Coalition.
We are sanctuary. We are a sanctuary.
When I think of Rainbow Push, I think of two words: social justice,
education advocacy,
political empowerment,
freedom and equality,
corporate partnership.
Stop the violence. Save the children.
Don't get it. Shut it down. If we don't get it, shut it down.
Political change.
inclusion, evolution, progress, justice.
Jesse Jackson.
Keep hope. Keep hope alive. Keep hope. Keep hope alive.
I am. Somebody. I am. Somebody. Protect me. Protect me. Protect me. Protect me. Never neglect me. Never neglect me.
We want to be bridges to end these cultural gaps.
Going forward by hope, not backward, by fear.